When a woman decides to fall silent, no warnings, no demands, a void opens up in the man that his ego immediately tries to fill. At first, he feels a hollow relief. She's just busy, she'll be back to normal soon. It's his ego inflating with false security, replaying familiar scripts of drama or reconciliation. But Jung warns us that the unconscious won't be fooled by surface clues. It registers everything the conscious mind ignores. That's when the first shift happens. He believes he's in control, but inside something keeps echoing. At the outset tier, he hunts for rational explanations, checking his phone every 5 minutes, scrolling through old conversations, filling his schedule with trivial commitments. Anything to quiet that nameless unease. When logic fails, the symbolic language of the unconscious takes over, and a diffuse restlessness sets in. Unawares, he projects idealized images of the woman who won't answer, and what was once a routine becomes shrouded in mystery. Carl Jung taught that the male psyche carries an inner image of the feminine, the anima, shaped by all our emotional, cultural, and archetypal experiences. When the real woman breaks the expected pattern and retreats into silence, she fractures. That projection, the anima or unsettled, no longer mirrors a comfortable stereotype but challenges him to look inward. Silence stops being mere absence and becomes an active presence, hinting at deep questions about his own identity. It's common, then, for him to downplay it with excuses like, "She just wants attention," or "She's overreacting." But such rationalizations aren't enough. Behind his denial, the unconscious grinds on its slow, relentless gears. Memories of her smiles, her touch, her confidences surface in flashes, undermining logical arguments. Her serene absence becomes a mirror, reflecting the very fears he's tried to avoid: fear of rejection, emotional insecurity, wounds of abandonment. In this first stage of conscious silence, pure discomfort arises, without yet tipping into longing. It signals that something in his emotional landscape has shifted. What seemed controllable has become unpredictable. And this uncertainty sparks curiosity, shatters the illusion of power, and provokes a genuine encounter with the shadow, that repressed aspect Jung called the gateway to self-knowledge. In the second stage, her absence stops being a small detail and moves to the center of his thoughts. At first, he chalks it up to external factors: work, appointments, temporary distractions. But as time goes on, that silent void takes on a life of its own. He realizes, even if he won't admit it, that the woman he cared about isn't available the way she used to be. The discomfort grows stronger, not quite longing, but a persistent unease, like an alert sounding softly. In the background, he starts hunting for emotional reassurance. He checks his phone repeatedly, scrolls through past chats, looks for any read receipts or last seen timestamps that might prove his theory. She'll snap back to normal any minute now. When no logical explanation appears, he tries to distract himself with everyday activities, working out, meeting friends, side projects, but her silence still seeps into every moment, subtle yet inescapable. It's like an unsettling background track he can't mute. Meanwhile, his unconscious speaks in symbols. Sporadic dreams show her in unexpected settings. A coffee they once shared now feels like a gesture of affection. Her spontaneous laugh echoes in an empty room. Even the brush of her hand becomes a sensory ghost. These images act as messengers of a truth his ego stubbornly ignores. Jung reminds us that before the mind rationalizes, the psyche communicates through archetypal symbols and images. This is how he begins to sense his own shadow reflected in that space of silence. Then he feels the impulse to test her, to provoke any reaction that confirms he still holds the power. A brief, almost automatic message: "You okay?" Or "Where'd you go?" Sometimes he even thinks about calling, but the fear of a distant reply stops him cold. He juggles hope and dread, imagining scenarios where she'd explain everything and slip back into their old routine. But those fantasies never come true, and the silence remains unbroken. This relentless quiet breaks down his old patterns. The man who always believed he controlled the emotional game realizes control has slipped through his fingers. At that moment, he asks himself with barely conscious honesty, what if the problem isn't her, but something in me? That question, even if it's unconscious at first, marks the start of real self-inquiry. He begins to notice, albeit shyly, communication failures, unspoken expectations, behaviors he once overlooked. Her silence becomes the spark of a deep transformation. Here, the internal conflict reaches a turning point. Keep trying to restore the old dynamic or accept that returning to the past is impossible. Each ping of an unanswered message strengthens his reflection. And just when it seems there's no roadmap left, genuine curiosity blooms. Who is this woman who refuses to react, who stays serene in her own absence? That symbolic awakening is the second major movement of the male psyche. Have you ever caught yourself replaying scenes you thought were buried while remaining silent? Share in the comments if this has ever happened to you. In the third stage, silence ceases to be just an empty space and begins to take on concrete form in his mind. He experiences fragmented recollections of simple moments, the way she looked at him before sleep, her spontaneous laugh in the middle of a conversation, the delicate way she brushed her hair. These fragments aren't accompanied by classic longing, but by a new, almost obscure feeling that blends curiosity with regret. It's as if each moment transforms into a small symbol demanding attention. Jung taught that the psyche processes experiences through archetypal symbols even before reason can grasp them. In his unconscious, these memories act as keys that unlock inner doors, leading him to reflect without realizing it. He finds himself projecting hidden meanings onto every gesture. Did she leave something unsaid? What was she trying to tell me with that look? His anima, the inner image of the feminine, is reconfigured, because the woman who insists on silence no longer fits the comfortable archetypes he once knew. This is when his inner synchronicity begins to manifest. Jung described synchronicity as meaningful coincidences appearing at just the right moment to awaken us. Suddenly, he might find one of her possessions in an unexpected place, hear a song that reminds him of their time together, or receive a message from a mutual friend about them. These events aren't mere accidents. They function as signals that something profound has shifted within him. At this point, his ego still tries to contain the experience, rationalizing these signs as imagination or a shared fate. But the restless unconscious offers flashes of self-confrontation. He notices he's more sensitive, catching details he once ignored, realizing everyday conversations have lost their spark without her active presence, and without fully understanding why, he feels a powerful attraction to this inaccessible woman, precisely because she has withdrawn. Then comes the impulse for a discreet yet significant gesture. He thinks about sending her a message. Just wanted to check how you're doing, but hesitates, afraid of breaking the subtle enchantment of silence. Sometimes he even begins typing, "I just wanted to say," only to delete it. Each unsent word becomes an emotional echo inside him. In this back and forth of unfulfilled impulses, he encounters the true Jungian surprise, a meeting with his own shadow. Jung defined the shadow as the traits we deny in ourselves and project onto others. In her silence, he discovers the aspect he despised, emotional dependency. This realization forces him to acknowledge that part of their bond was sustained by his need for validation. From that moment, his inner conflict deepens: remain bound to old dynamics or embrace the challenge of a more conscious relationship. At this crossroads, a new drive for reconstruction emerges, this time grounded in authenticity for both of them. In the fourth stage, intense curiosity turns into an urge to act. Not knowing exactly where to start, he types a short, almost automatic message that barely captures his inner whirlwind. "Hey, you okay?" He sends it and waits. No reply comes, or when it does, it's cold and brief, offering no promise of returning to the old routine. This small failure stirs an ambiguous feeling, frustration mixed with relief at having finally tested the limits of that silence. Next, He experiments with other tactics. He might leave the message "read" without replying, just to provoke a reaction. Or he'll post something to his status, knowing she'll see it, hoping her curiosity will pull him back onto her radar. Sometimes, he even reaches out to a mutual friend, subtly asking if she's okay, yet feigning calm. Every move becomes a piece on an emotional chessboard. He's still trying to regain control, but senses the rules have been rewritten. Jung described individuation as the process where the persona, the social mask, fragments, giving way to confrontation with the shadow. That confrontation happens now. Each attempt to connect reveals the dependency he had denied. The mere act of typing a message and deleting it before sending shows how his desire to reach out coexists with his fear of vulnerability. Meanwhile, her silence ceases to be a static void and becomes an active force. She doesn't respond and remains neutral, and that neutrality turns into a powerful mirror. He notices that if she doesn't react as expected, with jealousy or panic, the impact is even greater. The absence of drama acts like a magnifying glass on every gesture, every glance, every hesitation of his. At this juncture, he faces a decisive fork in the road, push for a more intense contact, risking the fragile ground he's rebuilt, or respect her silence and watch his own impulses. The first option is driven by his wounded ego, still believing it can fix things. The second, though seemingly passive, marks the beginning of a deeper shift, because it demands he examine what their bond truly meant. This is when Jungian transformation gathers momentum. He stops seeking answers outside himself and starts exploring the internal motivations that led him to rely so heavily on her presence. Every aborted attempt at contact lays bare a wound needing healing: fear of abandonment, craving for validation, unconscious beliefs about worthiness. From this fourth stage onward, the emotional dynamic no longer centers on her presence, or absence, but on his own journey of self-discovery. He begins to see that the woman who goes silent is not an enemy, but a catalyst for his own growth. In the fifth stage, he begins to notice subtle shifts in his own behavior even before any response from her. Her silence has served as an unflinching mirror, but now he wants more than to understand the echo of that absent voice. He wants to reshape his own inner dialogue. He starts to question patterns that once felt automatic, answering every notification instantly, seeking approval in small gestures, holding on to arguments out of insecurity. A positive restlessness takes root, as though an invitation to a new way of being has been issued. Unaware at first, he rediscovers activities that reconnect him to himself and no longer depend on her presence. He might pick up an old hobby, jot reflections in an improvised journal, or meditate for a few minutes before sleep. Each act of self-care symbolizes a step toward individuation, Jung's essential concept of becoming who we truly are, freed from unconscious projections. At this point, he isn't merely trying to rekindle the old bond, but to forge a more authentic connection with his own soul. Simultaneously, he experiments with new forms of communication, both internal and external. In his mind, he scripts empathetic conversations rooted in respect and active listening, no longer driven by a fear of losing control. The inner voice that once whispered worries now tries out genuine curiosity. How has your week been? What have you discovered about yourself lately? These mental drafts haven't left his head yet, but they signal a different willingness to engage. When he finally decides to send a message reflecting this new posture, he chooses each word with care. It isn't a plea for her return or a test, but an open invitation to mutual presence. He might write something like, "I've been thinking about how unhurriedly you express yourself. I'd love to know what this time has meant for you." Such a message honors her silence as a statement of autonomy, not a mistake to be fixed. If she replies, it becomes the start of a genuine dialogue. If she doesn't, he understands that the value of his gesture stands on its own, independent of any immediate response. Through this movement, he discovers a fundamental Jungian principle. Healthy relationships thrive when each individual recognizes their own wholeness, rather than trying to fill another's void. He realizes that honoring his own emotional integrity allows him to see the other with absolute respect, without projecting childhood needs onto them. Throughout this fifth stage, the fear that her silence signifies total rejection gradually transforms into genuine curiosity about her desires and boundaries. He learns to wait without anxiety, ask questions without pressure, and embrace her space as part of his own growth. Whether she responds or not, he stands sovereign in his own company, as a new version of himself. This journey of self-confrontation and reinvention doesn't happen overnight, but by now he is undeniably changed. The woman who chose silence has guided him through an inner landscape he never knew existed, where he uncovered strengths he didn't realize he possessed. In the sixth stage, after completing the journey of self-discovery, he finds himself in a new place, ready to reach out again without the old urges to control or demand. Now, the impulse to send a message comes from wanting to share a meaningful insight, like offering someone a piece of inner treasure. He realizes that her silence wasn't a barrier but an invitation to rediscover his own voice and to really listen to hers. As he crafts the text "Why," every word reflects his transformation. He might write something like, "I noticed that in your silence I discovered strengths I didn't know I had. I'd love to hear what this time has meant for you." He hesitates before hitting send without rushing or expecting too much. It's a gesture of acknowledgement, honoring the space she created and showing he's learned to respect her pace without projecting his own anxieties. When he finally does send it, he feels a different kind of calm, not pure relief but a serene curiosity. Jung reminds us that in individuation, we learn to accept the psyche's natural flow. So he watches what happens next without overthinking it. If she replies, it's a door to real dialogue. If she doesn't, he already knows his gesture has its own value, independent of any immediate response. In the seventh stage, he no longer sees her silence as an obstacle, but as a gateway to profound intimacy. Now, every shared silence, the space where no words are spoken that once sparked anxiety, is viewed as an invitation to listen rather than simply hear. He realizes that in the absence of words, there are sensations, gestures, and glances that communicate far more. It's as if stillness becomes a secret script, each pause loaded with meaning. He notices that instead of rushing to fill the silence, she carefully chooses when and how to engage. This sparks in him a mature curiosity, to understand her personal rhythm, to respect her timing and values without turning the conversation into a waiting game or source of pressure. Jung spoke of psychological time, the internal clock. Each of us moves by at our own pace. He comes to see that their connection thrives not on urgency but on conscious presence. Over the following days, small rituals of mutual attention arise naturally, without artifice. A heartfelt good morning at the first waking moment, a brief message noting something he observed, a book she loves, a favorite flavor, a shared memory. Each gesture stems from refined observation and genuine interest, not manipulation. Their bond deepens because it grows from spontaneous, respectful care. Inside, he senses that his anima, the inner image of the feminine Jung described, has adjusted to her real self, not an idealized archetype, but a concrete person with strength, autonomy, and eloquent silence. He recognizes that this authentic encounter transcends superficial desire, moving toward mature affection that embraces both presence and absence. At this point, he practices conscious empathy, imagining what it would be like to walk in her shoes, using her silence as a tool for self-affirmation. This shift in perspective expands his compassion as he understands that each person's autonomy is vital to the health of any relationship. He frees himself from the role of emotional savior and becomes an attentive partner. Their conversations develop their own rhythm, with comfortable pauses and no rush to fill every moment. They exchange meaningful glances before speaking and learn together to savor nonverbal language. Jung affirmed that true communication occurs beyond words, in the symbolic layers of the collective unconscious, and they're experiencing it firsthand. When a misunderstanding arises, He no longer rushes to quash the spark of conflict but uses silence as a tool for reflection. Instead of reacting immediately, he respects each other's space to process emotions and return with greater clarity. What once felt unfamiliar now proves highly effective at preventing unnecessary escalation. In this stage, he understands that her silence isn't a bargaining chip, but a guide to a more conscious way of relating. He sees that her quiet has revealed not only his shadow areas, but also the potential for light within them both. Their relationship becomes a mutual laboratory of self-discovery, each mirroring the other in the journey toward individuation. Have you ever experienced a moment when another person's silence became the richest space for connection? In the 8th stage, their bond transforms into a consciously co-creative process, where every gesture, shared silence, and spoken word carries mutual intention. He no longer aims merely to provoke an automatic reaction from her. Instead, he invites both internal and external dialogue that honors each other's autonomy. What once was defensive silence now alternates with meaningful interventions, as if composing a symphony where the pauses are as important as the notes. He suggests a simple meeting, a coffee break where neither of them needs to fill the silence with explanations. Jung spoke of the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to unite opposites and generate something new. In that spirit, silence and speech merge, creating an atmosphere in which reciprocity can flourish. He stays attuned to her rhythm, sensing when her silence signals introspection and when, quietly, she's ready to open up. At that moment, he shares a passage from a book or a song that offered him insights into self-discovery, inviting her to reflect on it with him. This spirit of exchange shows he has learned to value not just the content of their conversation, but the quality of the relational space. He doesn't monologue or pressure her. He listens to every nuance she offers, whether in words or in welcomed silence. Inside, he feels his anima, the inner image of the feminine Jung described, has matured. No longer fixed on an idealized projection, it now aligns with the real woman, with her limits, her virtues, and her eloquent strength of silence. He recognizes that conscious love is grounded in allowing the other person to be exactly who they are without trying to fix or fill emotional gaps. Their communication evolves into symbolic acts. A note left on the pillow recalls a shared moment. A freshly picked flower hints at his attention to detail. A brief text message expresses gratitude without demanding a reply. Each discreet gesture reinforces respect for her freedom and her time, cementing a bond built on trust and authenticity. In this atmosphere, he proposes dreaming together, planning a brief, meaningful experience, like a walk in a historic neighborhood or a picnic in a quiet park. The suggestion carries no urgency. Rather, it invites full presence and shared appreciation of small everyday beauties. In the 9th stage, he no longer sees her silence as a threat, but as a signal of mutual maturity. He's learned that listening without speaking can be just as vital as sharing his feelings. Throughout this journey, he's integrated Jung's teaching that we all carry images, wounds, and potentials within us that only emerge when held up to an empathic mirror. Now he wants to build something lasting, based not on neediness, but on clear intentions. He begins looking ahead with her as a collaborator. Rather than making unilateral decisions, he suggests small agreements, choosing moments to talk without distractions, establishing signals for when one of them needs silence and cues for when they crave closeness. These aren't rigid rules, they're flexible frameworks that honor each person's individuality. Jung explained that healthy relationships require the transcendence of opposites, combining autonomy and togetherness without collapsing one into the other. In this process, he revisits limiting beliefs that once triggered his anxiety. Instead of thinking, "What if she isn't talking, it means she doesn't care," he now understands that her silence can signify reflection, self-care, or simply inner joy. He even adopts these pauses himself, solidifying the understanding that a relationship isn't an extension of oneself, but a meeting of distinct worlds. At the same time, he cultivates rituals that reinforce their connection. A good night message expressing gratitude for what they've learned together. a custom playlist featuring songs that mark meaningful moments, a shared reading session of passages from Jung or other thinkers on conscious love. These rituals aren't mechanical routines. They're spontaneous acts of mutual attention, born from an act of listening sharpened by silence. Inside, he notices he reacts more calmly when she retreats. Instead of feeling emptiness or guilt, he feels curiosity about what she's experiencing in that wordless space. Simultaneously, he communicates his own needs clearly, showing vulnerability without demanding immediate fixes. Jung pointed out that individuation happens when we integrate shadow and light. In this stage, they begin experiencing that integration as a couple. When they talk, every word carries weight and every pause has freedom. He asks questions that invite deep sharing. What has this silence brought you? Or, how can I support you today? And she answers honestly, knowing her earlier. Silence was heard and respected. This symbiotic exchange creates an upward spiral of trust. It's in this 9th chapter that their bond reaches new solidity, not because they've eliminated all friction, but because they've learned to navigate both inner and outer currents together. Their relationship ceases to be a stage for power plays and becomes a laboratory for shared growth. Each acknowledges the other as co-author of a story built on the balance between presence and personal space. In the 10th stage, they both live the fruits of a shared individuation process. He sees her silence not as an obstacle, but as the catalyst that transformed their bond into a conscious partnership. From this point on, their exchanges aren't driven by demands, but by invitations. Invitations to explore feelings, celebrate discoveries, goals, and build shared plans, always respecting each other's internal rhythms. He's learned to read her silence as a statement of autonomy and maturity. Instead of haste, he uses active listening to welcome what remains unspoken. And she, in turn, recognizes in him a partner who's grown into an attentive companion, capable of integrating shadow and light, just as Jung taught. Together, they experience a dynamic where trust deepens with each respectful pause and every carefully chosen word. Simple moments now carry special meaning. A twilight conversation reflecting on a Jung passage that resonated with them. A spontaneous stroll without a predetermined destination. Observing both inner and outer landscapes. A silent embrace that speaks more than words ever could. These symbolic gestures affirm what they've learned, that conscious love consists of both freedom and connection. Looking back, he sees how far he's come, from the urge to control the emotional game to the serenity of honoring personal space, from effective dependency to the joy of sharing experiences without false expectations. And she notices in him not just romantic interest, but the reflection of a man committed to his own growth. If this chapter clarified how a man acts when a woman embraces silence, leave a comment sharing your experience. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring Jung's insights into the psyche, and share this video with anyone who needs to understand the transformative power of feminine silence. Wishing you much wisdom, love, and blessings in your life. Gratitude.